Harold Prescott lay in the spacious, opulent bedroom of his mansion, a place that had echoed with laughter and warmth in years gone by, but now felt like a hollow shell. The walls, adorned with portraits of ancestors and landscapes, seemed to close in around him, amplifying the silence that enveloped his solitary existence. The grand chandelier above cast a soft golden light, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, a reminder of the passage of time and the life he had lived. His body ached, each breath a reminder of his failing health, yet Harold felt a strange sense of peace. It was a tranquility born not from acceptance, but from the realization that his time was drawing to a close. He had spent decades building his empire, amassing wealth that could have secured a lineage of comfort for generations. Yet, in his pursuit of success, he had neglected the very connections that could have made his life richer. The thought of his estranged children, Emily and Jake, brought a pang of regret to his heart. He could still recall the voices of their childhood, the joy they brought into his life, and the moments that slipped through his fingers like grains of sand. With a sigh, he reached for the phone, his fingers trembling with the effort. He dialed his doctor's number, knowing that the conversation would confirm what he had been avoiding. "Hello, Dr. Thompson," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor of his hands. "It's Harold Prescott." "Harold," the doctor replied, his tone professional yet warm. "I'm glad you called. I wanted to discuss your test results." Harold closed his eyes, bracing himself. "I know it's not good, is it?" "I'm afraid your condition has worsened. We need to talk about your care options," Dr. Thompson said, his words careful and measured. "Care options?" Harold echoed, amusement flickering in his chest. "I've spent my life caring for things. Businesses, houses, properties. I think I've done enough caring for a lifetime." A silence hung in the air, thick with unspoken thoughts. "Harold, you need to consider your health. It's important." "Health?" Harold chuckled bitterly, a sound that felt foreign in the empty room. "What's wealth without health? What is wealth without family?" He paused, his mind drifting to Emily and Jake, the children he had chased away with his ambition. "I suppose I'll have to face them soon enough." "Are you planning to reach out to them?" Dr. Thompson asked gently. "Perhaps," Harold said, a hint of vulnerability in his voice. "But I don't know if they'll want to hear from me. I've given them little reason to care." "Family is complicated," the doctor replied, "but it's never too late to try." The conversation lingered in Harold's mind long after he hung up. He stared out the window, watching the leaves sway in the gentle breeze. It was autumn, the season of change, and he felt an unsettling kinship with the trees shedding their leaves. He had built a fortress around himself, but the walls were crumbling, and soon he would have to confront the consequences of a life lived in isolation. Meanwhile, in a sleek conference room that exuded power and success, Emily Prescott sat at the head of a long table, her eyes focused intently on the presentation before her. She was the epitome of ambition, dressed in a tailored suit that spoke of her drive and determination. The room buzzed with the energy of her colleagues, each person eager to impress, to secure their place in the corporate ladder. As she closed the deal of a lifetime, sealing a partnership that would elevate her company's status, her phone buzzed insistently on the table. She glanced at the screen, a frown knitting her brow as she saw her brother's name flash across it. Reluctantly, she silenced the phone, pushing it aside. "Let's wrap this up," she said, her voice commanding. "We need to finalize the details before the end of the day." Hours later, as the meeting concluded and her colleagues filtered out, Emily finally checked her messages. Her heart sank as she read the text from Jake. "Dad passed away. Funeral details to follow." The words hit her like a physical blow, and for a moment she was frozen in place, the reality of her father's death crashing over her like a wave. "Emily, you okay?" her assistant Rachel asked, concern etched on her face. "Yeah, just processing some news," Emily replied, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'll be fine." But the truth was that she felt anything but fine. As much as she had distanced herself from her father's legacy, the thought of his passing stirred a mix of conflicting emotions. Anger, sadness, and a strange sense of relief swirled within her. He had been a distant figure in her life, a man more invested in his empire than in his children. Yet now, faced with his absence, she couldn't help but feel a sense of longing for the father she had wished he could be. Across town, Jake Prescott leaned against a grease-stained workbench in his small mechanic shop, the scent of oil and metal saturating the air. His hands were calloused, a testament to the years he had spent laboring to make ends meet. The shop was a refuge for him, a place where he could escape the burdens of his life and lose himself in the rhythm of repairing engines. Yet today, even the familiar scent felt heavy, as if the weight of his father's death had seeped into the very walls. Jake's phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him from his thoughts. He pulled it out, his heart racing as he saw Emily's name. "What now?" he muttered under his breath, swiping to read the message. Dad passed away. Funeral details to follow. A surge of anger bubbled up inside him, mingling with an overwhelming sadness. He had long since accepted that his relationship with Harold was strained, a chasm widened by years of neglect and disappointment. But the finality of death struck him hard, a reminder of all the words left, unspoken, and the reconciliations never attempted. Jake's fists clenched at his sides as he recalled the years of feeling unworthy, the countless moments of being overshadowed by his father's relentless pursuit of success. "Hey man, you good?" a voice broke through his thoughts. It was Ben, his co-worker, concern etched on his face. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just got some news," Jake replied, forcing a casual tone that belied the turmoil within. "Dad's gone." "Damn, I'm sorry," Ben said, his voice softening. "You okay?" Jake shrugged, feeling the weight of his emotions. "I don't know. We weren't close. I mean, he chose work over family, but now he's gone, and it feels complicated." "Complicated how?" Ben asked, leaning against the bench, genuinely interested. "Just, a lot of anger, I guess, and sadness. I didn't expect to feel anything, but here we are," Jake admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think you'll go to the funeral?" Ben asked cautiously. "Yeah, I think I should," Jake replied, rubbing the back of his neck, a gesture of uncertainty. "I mean, it's the least I can do. I just don't know what to expect." "Whatever happens, just remember it's okay to feel what you feel," Ben said, offering a supportive nod. "You've got this." With a heavy heart, Jake made his decision. He would attend the funeral, not knowing what awaited him or how he would confront the ghost of a father who had cast a long shadow over his life. The thought of facing Emily, of standing together in their shared grief, filled him with both dread and a flicker of hope. Perhaps this would be the moment where they could begin to bridge the chasm left by their father's choices. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the town, both Emily and Jake found themselves reflecting on their father's legacy, each in their own way. The impending funeral loomed large, a moment that would force them to confront their past, their present, and the uncertain future that awaited them. The air was heavy with the scent of lilies and polished wood as Emily and Jake stood on opposite sides of the small chapel, their gazes occasionally meeting before quickly darting away. The soft murmurs of the gathered crowd, composed of family, friends, and acquaintances, filled the space, but the tension between the siblings was palpable. They both felt the weight of their father's absence pressing down on them, mingling with unspoken resentment and a shared history that neither wanted to confront. Emily stood rigid, her designer heels clicking softly against the wooden floor as she shifted her weight from one foot to another. She wore a black dress that clung to her figure, a stark contrast to the somber atmosphere. Her perfectly coiffed hair fell in waves around her shoulders, framing a face that bore the mask of composure, yet her heart raced with conflicting emotions. The last time she and Jake had been in the same room together was at their mother's funeral years ago, and now they were reunited under even more strained circumstances. Jake, on the other hand, wore a simple black suit that seemed out of place against the backdrop of formality surrounding him. He ran a hand through his tousled hair, feeling the heat of anger bubbling beneath the surface. The memories of their father's sharp words and the emotional distance he had imposed on their lives flooded back to him, mingling with a profound sadness. He stole a glance at Emily, her profile sharp and unyielding, and for a moment he felt the urge to bridge the chasm that had formed between them. As the service began, a family friend, Mr. Thompson, stepped forward to speak. Harold Prescott was a man of great vision and generosity, he began, his voice echoing in the chapel. He dedicated his life to helping others, ensuring that those less fortunate than himself had a chance at a better life. The words, while intended to honor their father, only served to deepen the chasm in Jake's heart. He remembered the countless times he had sought his father's approval, only to be met with indifference. Generosity? Jake muttered under his breath, barely loud enough for Emily to hear. Is that what they're calling it now? Emily shot him a sharp look, her eyes narrowing. Not the time, Jake, she whispered, her voice strained. We're supposed to be honoring him. Honoring him? He scoffed quietly, shaking his head. You mean pretending he was some kind of saint? He was anything but that. Their private exchange was interrupted as Mr. Thompson continued, his words weaving a tale of charity and community service that felt disjointed from the reality Jake and Emily had experienced. They exchanged glances, a silent understanding passing between them that neither could articulate. The facade of their father's public persona was starkly different from the man they knew. As the service drew to a close, Emily felt a strange mixture of relief and dread. The real reason they had gathered was yet to come. She glanced at Jake again, and for the first time she noticed the weariness etched into his features, the lines of hardship that had deepened since their last encounter. Despite their differences, she felt a pang of sympathy for him. They were both children of a man who had built walls instead of bridges. After the service, the siblings found themselves standing outside the chapel, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows on the ground. Friends and family members drifted away, offering their condolences with hollow platitudes. Emily's heart sank as she watched them file past, and each one seemingly oblivious to the tumultuous emotions churning within her. Are you ready for this? Jake asked, his voice low, breaking the silence that had enveloped them. Ready or not, we have to face it, Emily replied, her voice steadier than she felt. It's just a will reading, right? Right, Jake responded, but the skepticism in his tone was palpable. What do you think he left us? Emily shrugged. I don't know. I guess we'll find out soon enough. Her stomach twisted at the thought of whatever awaited them in their father's mansion, a place that had been both a sanctuary and a prison. As they arrived at the mansion, the grand facade loomed over them, its opulence a stark reminder of their father's wealth and the emotional distance it had created. The doors creaked open, revealing a dimly lit foyer filled with the muted colors of heavy drapes and antique furniture. The air felt thick, laden with memories both cherished and painful. A lawyer, Mr. Grayson, awaited them in the lavish living room, his demeanor professional but tinged with a hint of sympathy. Thank you for coming, he said, gesturing for them to take a seat. I know this is a difficult time for both of you. Jake sank into an ornate armchair, the plush fabric enveloping him as he crossed his arms. Let's just get this over with, he said, his impatience evident. Emily took a seat beside him, her posture rigid. What are we waiting for? She asked, her words sharper than intended. Mr. Grayson cleared his throat, his expression shifting to one of solemnity. I have gathered you here today to discuss the last will and testament of Harold Prescott. He opened a folder, glancing down at the document with a furrowed brow. As you know, your father had very specific wishes regarding his estate. Jake leaned forward, his heart racing. Can we just hear it already? Of course, Mr. Grayson said, adjusting his glasses. Harold Prescott has bequeathed the majority of his fortune to the Prescott Foundation, established in his name to support various charitable causes. Each of you will receive a modest sum, but the foundation will be the primary beneficiary. Shock rippled through the room. Emily's mouth dropped open as she processed the words. The foundation? She echoed, disbelief coloring her voice. He left everything to a charity. Yes, Mr. Grayson confirmed, his tone even. He believed that his wealth would be best utilized in service to others. The total amount allocated to each of you is... Wait, Jake interrupted, his voice rising. You mean to tell us that after all the years he spent ignoring us, he chose a charity over his own children? Emily's face flushed with anger and hurt. Why would he do this? We deserved more than a measly sum. Mr. Grayson held up a hand, attempting to calm the rising storm. I understand this is difficult to process, but your father felt strongly about his legacy being tied to philanthropy. He believed that true wealth lies in what we can give, not what we can keep. Great, Jake muttered bitterly. So he gave away everything and left us with scraps. How noble. Emily felt a well of frustration bubbling to the surface. Maybe he thought that by doing this, he could make amends for the years he spent pushing us away, she said, struggling to keep her voice steady. It doesn't make it any easier, but what? Jake shot back. You think that erases the pain, the resentment? Their voices rose, echoing in the lavish room. Mr. Grayson shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but he kept his gaze focused on the siblings, understanding the depth of their turmoil. Emily took a deep breath, trying to rein in her emotions as she turned to face Jake. I just think, maybe there was more to him than we realized. Maybe he thought we'd be better off without his money, without the expectations. Jake shook his head, disbelief etched on his features. You're defending him, after everything. I'm not defending him, Jake. I'm trying to understand. Maybe he chose this path because he knew he had failed us, she replied, her voice trembling slightly. Silence fell over the room, the weight of their father's choices hanging heavily in the air. They were left to grapple with the reality of their father's legacy, a legacy that felt more like a burden than a blessing. As they sat in the opulent living room, surrounded by remnants of a life filled with wealth, Emily and Jake realized that they were not just fighting over their father's fortune, they were wrestling with the ghosts of their shared past. The will had revealed more than just financial details. It had unearthed the unresolved feelings and unhealed wounds that had long divided them. In that moment of vulnerability, they recognized the complexity of their father's choices and the impact it had on their own lives. The journey ahead would not be easy, but it would force them to confront the truths they had both avoided for far too long. As the afternoon sun filtered through the dust-laden windows of Harold Prescott's vast mansion, Emily and Jake stood amidst the remnants of a life once filled with laughter and love, now replaced by silence and shadows. The air was heavy with nostalgia and unresolved tensions as they began to sift through the belongings of a father they barely knew. Emily held a box of old photographs in her hands, her fingers trembling slightly as she opened it. The first picture that caught her eye was of a younger Harold, beaming with joy on a family vacation at the beach. She could almost hear the laughter of their younger selves echoing in her mind. Jake, look at this, she called out, her voice tinged with a mixture of surprise and sorrow. Remember when we went to the coast? I was so young, and you built that enormous sandcastle. Jake stepped closer, peering over her shoulder. Yeah, I remember. You were so proud of that thing until the tide came in and washed it away, he replied, a hint of a smile breaking through his previous solemnity. But as quickly as it appeared, the smile faded, replaced by the weight of their shared memories. He was never really there, though, was he? Emily sighed, her eyes drifting to the next photograph. No, he wasn't. But seeing these pictures, it's like there was a part of him that wanted to be. She flipped through more images, each one a reminder of the family bonds that had frayed over the years. Do you think he ever regretted it? Jake asked quietly, a note of vulnerability in his voice. Regretted pushing us away? Before Emily could answer, she noticed a bundle of yellowed letters tucked beneath the photographs. Curiosity piqued, she pulled them out and began to read the first one. It was addressed to her, written in her father's distinct, elegant handwriting. Dear Emily, she read aloud, her voice faltering as she continued. I write this with a heavy heart, knowing that I have not been the father you deserve. The choices I made, driven by ambition and the desire to succeed, came at a great cost. I see now that I chose my career over my family, and for that, I am deeply sorry." Jake leaned in closer, his interest piqued. "What does it say?" Emily looked up, her eyes glistening. "He regrets how he treated us, Jake. He talks about how he was so consumed by his work that he lost sight of what really mattered. He wishes he could turn back time." "Does he mention me?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She flipped through the letters, her heart racing. "Yes, he does. He mentions you in almost every letter. He talks about his hopes for you, how proud he was of your determination. He wanted to reconnect, but didn't know how." Jake's face remained stoic, but Emily could see the storm of emotions swirling beneath the surface. "It's easy to say all this now that he's gone," he said, bitterness creeping into his tone. "Where was all this when we needed him?" "I don't know, Jake," Emily replied, her heart aching for her brother. "But maybe he was just lost too. Maybe he thought he was doing what was best for us." Jake shook his head, frustration evident in his posture. "Or maybe he was just a coward. It's hard to forgive someone who made us feel unimportant for so long." Silence enveloped them as they continued to sift through the letters. Each one revealed more of Harold's regrets, his yearning for reconciliation, and his acknowledgement of the pain he caused. The siblings found themselves trapped in a bittersweet whirlwind of memories and long-buried emotions. As they reached the end of the letters, Emily's fingers trembled as she pulled out one last envelope. It was thicker than the others, and as she opened it, she realized it contained a scrapbook. The cover was worn but intricately decorated with family photos. "Jake, look at this," she said, excitement mingled with sorrow in her voice. "It's a scrapbook of our family vacations." Jake took the scrapbook from her hands and opened it carefully. The first pages were filled with snapshots of long-forgotten adventures, camping trips, birthday parties, and holidays spent together. He turned the pages slowly, the nostalgia flooding over him. "I remember this trip," he said, pointing to a photo of them roasting marshmallows by a campfire. "I was so mad at him for making us go hiking, but we had fun, didn't we?" "Yeah, we did," Emily replied, her eyes misty with memories. "It's strange how we can remember the good times even when the bad ones overshadowed them." Jake paused at a page filled with clippings from local newspapers highlighting Harold's philanthropic efforts. "Look at this," he said, his voice suddenly serious. "He was involved in the community more than we realized." Emily leaned in, scanning the articles. "It seems like he wanted to give back. Maybe that's why he chose the foundation over us. Maybe he thought he could make a difference that way." "But what about us?" Jake's voice was tinged with pain. "Didn't we matter enough to him?" "I think we did," Emily said softly. "But maybe he didn't know how to show it. It's hard to accept that our father was trying to be a better man, even if it came too late." As they continued to flip through the scrapbook, a sense of camaraderie began to blossom between them. The shared memories, once a source of pain, now served as a bridge between their estranged hearts. They were two siblings, united in their grief and longing for the father they had lost. "Do you think he ever loved us?" Jake asked, his voice breaking. Emily paused, searching for the right words. "I think he did, in his own way. It's complicated. Love doesn't always look the way we expect it to. Sometimes it's buried beneath layers of regret and mistakes." Jake closed the scrapbook, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe we can honor him by learning from his failures. We can break the cycle, you know." "Yeah," Emily agreed, a flicker of hope igniting within her. "We can decide to be better, to be there for each other, even when it's hard." They shared a moment of silence, the weight of their father's choices hanging in the air, but it was no longer suffocating. Instead, it transformed into a challenge that they were willing to embrace together. As they stood amidst the remnants of Harold Prescott's life, the siblings felt the stirrings of a new beginning. They would face the truth about their father, confront their own feelings of betrayal and hurt, and perhaps, in doing so, they could finally begin to heal. "We should investigate the foundation," Emily suggested, her determination growing. "If this is what he wanted to do with his legacy, then we need to understand it. Maybe there's more to his story that we don't know." Jake nodded, a sense of purpose igniting within him. "Yeah, let's find out why he chose it over us. Maybe it'll help us make sense of everything." As they exited the room filled with memories, Emily and Jake took their first steps toward understanding not only their father's choices but also their own lives. They were no longer just siblings bound by shared grief. They were allies embarking on a journey of discovery, love, and reconciliation, determined to uncover the truth behind Harold Prescott's final legacy. As Emily and Jake approached the entrance of the Prescott Foundation, a grand building adorned with intricate stonework and framed by lush gardens, an air of uncertainty hung between them. They had spent the past few days grappling with a myriad of emotions following their father's death and the shocking revelations from his will. The mansion that had once symbolized their father's wealth now felt like a weight on their shoulders, and this foundation, a testament to his philanthropic efforts, was their next step into the unknown. As they stepped inside, the atmosphere shifted from somber to hopeful. The lobby was brightly lit, with vibrant artwork displayed on the walls, all funded by Harold's endowment. It was a stark contrast to the darkness that had clouded their memories of him. A receptionist greeted them warmly, her friendly demeanor easing some of the tension. "Welcome to the Prescott Foundation. How may I assist you today?" she asked, her smile genuine. "We're here to learn more about the foundation and the causes our father supported," Emily replied, her voice steady despite the flutter of anxiety in her stomach. "Of course, I can set up a meeting with our director who can provide you with all the information you need," the receptionist said, already reaching for the phone. As they waited, Jake glanced around the lobby, taking in the photos of children benefiting from the Foundation's programs. Each face radiated joy, and it struck him how little he knew about his father's life beyond the confines of their broken relationship. "I never realized he was involved in so many initiatives," he murmured, shaking his head in disbelief. Emily nodded, crossing her arms. "Neither did I. It makes me wonder, was this who he was all along? Or was it just a facade?" Before Jake could respond, a tall man with a warm smile and kind eyes approached them. "You must be Emily and Jake Prescott. I'm Mark, the director of the foundation. It's a pleasure to meet you both." "Pleasure's ours," Jake replied, shaking Mark's hand firmly, while Emily offered a polite nod. "Let's have a seat and I'll tell you all about your father's legacy here," Mark suggested, leading them to a cozy sitting area lined with bookshelves brimming with literature on philanthropy and community service. Once settled, Mark cleared his throat. "Your father was deeply passionate about giving back to the community. He supported various charities focused on education, healthcare, and providing opportunities for underprivileged children. It was a cause very close to his heart." Emily leaned forward, intrigued. "What kind of programs did he fund?" Mark began to outline several initiatives: scholarships for students, healthcare initiatives for low-income families, and mentorship programs designed to empower youth. He believed that everyone deserves a chance to succeed regardless of their background. He often said that wealth is meaningless unless it is used to uplift others. Jake felt a strange mix of pride and resentment bubbling within him. "Did he ever mention us? Did he regret our estrangement?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. Mark's expression softened. "He often spoke about you both. He had regrets about how things turned out. He wished he had done things differently, but he believed that supporting the community was a way to atone for his past mistakes." "I can't believe he thought about us at all," Emily whispered, her heart heavy. "It feels so surreal to think he cared." Mark continued, "He wanted to inspire you to find your paths, and part of that was giving back. He hoped you would understand the importance of using your skills and resources to help others." As they talked, they learned of specific beneficiaries who credited Harold's generosity with changing their lives. Mark enthusiastically shared stories of students who received scholarships that allowed them to pursue higher education and families who had access to medical care because of the Foundation's efforts. "Let me introduce you to some of our beneficiaries," Mark said, standing up and gesturing for them to follow. He led them through a hallway adorned with photographs and success stories, each framed with care. They entered a room where a small group of people sat in a circle, and Mark introduced Emily and Jake. The atmosphere was warm, filled with laughter and camaraderie. One woman, a former scholarship recipient named Maria, stood up to speak. "Hi everyone, I'm so grateful to be here. When I was in high school, I never thought I could go to college. I came from a struggling family, and my parents worked multiple jobs just to make ends meet. But thanks to the Prescott Foundation, I received a scholarship that allowed me to attend university. Now, I'm a teacher, and I'm giving back to my community just like Harold did for me." Emily's heart swelled with emotion at Maria's story. She exchanged a glance with Jake, who looked equally moved. They had spent so much time harboring resentment toward their father, but here was proof that he had made a real difference in people's lives. Another beneficiary, a young man named Kyle, added, "Harold didn't just provide financial support. He believed in us. He was a mentor for many of us, always encouraging us to chase our dreams. His impact goes beyond money. It's about hope." Jake finally found his voice. "I never knew my father like that. I wish I could have seen this side of him." Emily felt a strange sense of loss wash over her. "Me too. It's hard to reconcile this with the man we knew." Mark interjected gently. "Sometimes people show their love in ways that are not immediately visible. Your father may have struggled with personal relationships, but he channeled that love into helping others." After spending time with the beneficiaries, Emily and Jake left the foundation feeling a mix of inspiration and sorrow. For the first time, they understood the depth of their father's character, even if they still grappled with the pain of their past. As they walked back to the car, Emily turned to Jake, her expression contemplative. "I think we need to change our perspective on him. He wasn't perfect, but he tried to make things right in his own way." Jake sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, it's just hard to let go of everything that happened. I don't know if I can forgive him completely." "Maybe forgiveness isn't about forgetting," Emily suggested softly. "Maybe it's about understanding why he did what he did and realizing he was human, just like us." Jake nodded quietly as they climbed into the car, the weight of their father's legacy settling around them. They shared a silence that felt less oppressive than before, a quiet acknowledgement of their shared journey and the complexities of familial love. Later that evening, they returned to Harold's mansion to sort through more of his belongings. The house felt emptier than before, the silence, heavy with memories. They rummaged through boxes, uncovering old photographs and trinkets that told stories of a life lived in both solitude and abundance. "Look at this," Emily said, holding up a dusty scrapbook. Its cover was worn, but the memories inside were vibrant. "It's full of family photos." Jake scoffed lightly. "I can't believe he kept these. I thought he wanted to forget us." "Maybe he couldn't," Emily replied, flipping through the pages. They found pictures from family vacations, birthdays, and moments that had once been filled with laughter. "We were happy once, weren't we?" Jake's brow furrowed as he stared at a picture of them as kids at the beach, sun-kissed and carefree. "Yeah, we were. I don't understand how it all fell apart." As they continued to sift through the scrapbook, they stumbled upon a small envelope tucked between the pages. Emily opened it, revealing a letter addressed to them. "Read this," she urged, her voice trembling with anticipation. Jake leaned closer as Emily unfolded the letter. It was dated a few months before Harold's death, and as she began to read aloud, the words resonated deeply within them. "My dear Emily and Jake, if you are reading this, it means I have left this world, but please know that I always loved you both, even when I failed to show it. I made mistakes, and I regret the distance that grew between us. My hope is that you will find a way to forgive me and each other. True wealth lies not in possessions, but in love and connection. I urge you to cherish one another and to seek happiness in places beyond material success. You are both capable of incredible things. Please don't let my choices define you. Tears brimmed in Emily's eyes as she finished reading. He really did care. He wanted us to know. Jake swallowed hard, feeling a lump in his throat. I just wish he had said this to us when he was alive. Emily sighed, wiping her tears. We can still honor his memory. We can make a difference, just like he wanted. As they sat in the dim light of the mansion, the shadows of their father's choices began to lift, replaced by a flicker of hope. They still had a long way to go, but in that moment, they found a glimmer of understanding, a chance to redefine their relationship with their father's memory and ultimately with each other. Emily stood in the spacious living room of her father's mansion, surrounded by the remnants of a life that felt as alien to her now as the moon. The grand chandelier sparkled overhead, casting intricate shadows on the walls adorned with portraits of stern-looking ancestors. She had always admired the opulence of this place, yet it now felt suffocating. The weight of her father's absence pressed down on her, mingling with the bitterness she had harbored for years. Can you believe this? Jake's voice broke through her reverie. He was leaning against the fireplace, arms crossed, a frown etched on his face. He leaves everything to some charity instead of us. It's like he didn't even care. Maybe he cared more than we realized, Emily replied, her tone softer than she intended. Did you see the foundation? The work they do? It's incredible. Sure, but it doesn't mean we're not entitled to some of it. We're his kids, for God's sake. Jake's frustration bubbled over. He kicked a stray piece of paper on the floor, sending it skittering across the marble. I know, but maybe he thought that giving to others was a better legacy than just handing us a check, Emily countered, her voice gaining strength. We have to find out why he chose this path. We owe him that much. Jake's brow furrowed as he paced the room. What if he was just trying to assuage his guilt? This foundation might be a way to cover up all the damage he did to us. Would you stop for a second? Emily snapped, the suppressed emotions finally spilling out. What if you're wrong? What if there's more to this than just his guilt? What if he genuinely believed in this cause? The room fell into a tense silence, the air thick with unresolved feelings. Jake stopped pacing and turned to her, his expression softening. Okay, fine, let's investigate together. If nothing else, it might help us understand him better. Emily sighed, grateful that they could at least find common ground. Let's start by diving deeper into the foundation's work. We need to see where the money is really going. Later that week, they found themselves seated in an unassuming conference room at the foundation's headquarters. The walls were lined with photos of smiling children, each representing a life touched by their father's wealth. Emily felt a twinge of pride mixed with sadness. This was the man she had wanted to know, the father who had been absent for too long. Good morning, a cheerful voice called, breaking her reverie. A middle-aged woman entered, her name tag reading, Maggie. I'm the director here. How can I help you two today? Thank you for meeting with us, Maggie, Emily said, forcing a smile. We're Harold Prescott's children. We wanted to learn more about the foundation and its initiatives. Maggie's demeanor shifted slightly, a hint of surprise mixed with warmth in her gaze. Of course. Your father was a remarkable man. His vision for this foundation was to create opportunities for those who need it most. Jake leaned forward, eager to learn more. What kind of programs does the foundation support? Maggie brightened, launching into a detailed explanation. We focus on educational scholarships for underprivileged children and healthcare initiatives for low-income families. Your father believed that everyone deserves a chance to succeed regardless of their background. Emily listened intently, her heart swelling at the thought of her father's legacy impacting lives in such a profound way. That's incredible, she said, her voice filled with genuine admiration. But is everything running smoothly? Maggie hesitated, her smile faltering for a moment. Well, like any organization, we face challenges. We've had some recent difficulties with transparency and management, but we're working through them. Difficulties? Jake repeated, his curiosity piqued. What kind of difficulties? Maggie glanced around the room, ensuring they were alone before lowering her voice. There have been some allegations of mismanagement within the board. A few whispers about funds being misallocated, but we're investigating internally. It's a sensitive matter. Emily exchanged a glance with Jake, their unspoken thoughts aligning. Do you think it's possible that someone is taking advantage of your father's legacy? She asked, her heart racing. It's a possibility, Maggie said, her expression grave. I can't share too much, but I would encourage you to keep an eye on things. Your father had a vision, and it would be a shame to see it compromised. As they left the foundation, the weight of Maggie's words hung in the air between them. Emily could feel a new determination brewing inside her. We need to dig deeper, Jake. This could be a chance to honor Dad's true intentions. Jake nodded, his earlier frustration giving way to a sense of purpose. Right. We can't let anyone tarnish his legacy. If there's something shady going on, we have to expose it. The next few days were a whirlwind of research, phone calls, and late-night discussions. They pored over financial reports, piecing together the puzzle of the Foundation's operations. With each revelation, their suspicions grew. Look at this, Jake said one evening, pointing at a glaring discrepancy on the screen. This board member, Linda Hayes, has been involved in several questionable transactions. It looks like she's been siphoning off funds. Emily's heart raced as she leaned closer to the screen. If this is true, we have to confront her. This isn't just about us anymore. It's about keeping Dad's legacy intact. You're right, Jake agreed, the fire in his eyes rekindling. We need to make sure this gets resolved, for all the kids and families depending on the Foundation. The day of the confrontation arrived, and the air was thick with tension as they entered the boardroom. Linda sat at the head of the table, her expression unreadable as they took their seats. Thank you for coming, she said coolly, a hint of irritation in her voice. What can I do for you? Emily cleared her throat, her heart pounding. We've been looking into the Foundation's financials and have found some discrepancies that we'd like to discuss. Linda raised an eyebrow, her facade of calm slipping slightly. Discrepancies? What are you talking about? Jake leaned forward, his voice steady. There are records indicating funds have been misallocated. We have evidence that suggests you've been embezzling money meant for charitable programs. Linda's expression hardened, and for a moment Emily feared they had crossed a line. You have no idea what you're talking about, she snapped, her voice icy. I've dedicated my life to this foundation. How dare you accuse me? Dedicating your life to this foundation shouldn't mean lining your pockets with its funds, Emily shot back, her resolve strengthening. We owe it to our father and all the people he wanted to help to get to the bottom of this. Linda's demeanor shifted, a flicker of panic crossing her face. You think you can just come in here and threaten me? You have no proof. Actually, we do, Jake interjected, pulling out a folder filled with documents. And we're prepared to take this to the authorities if necessary. The confrontation hung in the air, the tension palpable. Emily and Jake exchanged a glance, a silent pact forming between them. They were in this together, and they wouldn't let their father's legacy be tainted any longer. As the meeting progressed, their determination solidified, and they realized that uncovering the truth about their father wasn't just about correcting past wrongs. It was also about forging a new path for themselves, one guided by the values their father had tried to instill, even from afar. Let's make sure this foundation stands for what Dad intended, Emily said quietly, her resolve echoing through the room. We will not let it fall into the wrong hands. Jake nodded, a newfound sense of purpose lighting up his eyes. Together, they were ready to fight for more than just their father's legacy. They were ready to reclaim their own lives and identities in the process. Emily and Jake found themselves huddled in the dimly lit study of their father's mansion, surrounded by a sea of papers and files that spoke volumes of Harold Prescott's once vibrant life. The air was thick with tension and unspoken words as they pored over the evidence they had meticulously compiled regarding the embezzlement scandal at the foundation. The flickering light of the desk lamp cast shadows across their faces, illuminating the determination in their eyes. "Look at this," Jake said, his voice low but urgent. He pointed to a spreadsheet on his laptop, a detailed account of the foundation's finances. "These withdrawals don't add up. There's a pattern here, monthly sums that just vanish." Emily leaned closer, her brow furrowing as she scrutinized the screen. "You're right. This is more than just mismanagement. It's deliberate. We have to confront them with this." Jake nodded, his resolve hardening. "We need to gather more evidence first. If we just walk in there and drop this bombshell without solid proof, they'll dismiss us. They'll say we're just two disgruntled children trying to tarnish our father's legacy." "Then let's dig deeper," she replied, her voice gaining a sense of urgency. "We can't let this go unchecked. We owe it to Dad to ensure that his vision for the foundation isn't lost to greed." As they worked late into the night, the siblings found themselves increasingly in sync. The shared mission brought a renewed sense of purpose, a bond slowly mending over the shared grief and the desire to honor their father's memory. Each piece of evidence they uncovered felt like a thread, weaving their disparate lives back together. The following week, Emily and Jake arrived at the foundation's headquarters, an imposing brick building that loomed over the street like a monument to their father's generosity. They exchanged glances, both apprehensive and resolute. "Ready?" Emily asked, her heart racing. "Ready as I'll ever be," Jake replied, his jaw set. They walked inside, the polished floors echoing their footsteps, a stark contrast to the weight they carried. The board meeting was tense, filled with members who had once revered Harold Prescott. As they took their seats, the atmosphere crackled with uncertainty. The board president, a stoic man in his 60s named Mr. Whitaker, regarded them with a mixture of sympathy and skepticism. "Emily, Jake, thank you for coming." "Thank you for having us," Emily said, her voice steady despite the flutter of nerves in her stomach. She glanced at Jake, who nodded in encouragement. "We have some serious concerns we'd like to address regarding the foundation's finances," Jake began, his tone firm but respectful. "We've uncovered evidence of embezzlement and mismanagement by one of your board members." A murmur rippled through the room, and Mr. Whitaker's brow furrowed. "This is a serious accusation. Do you have proof?" Emily leaned forward, opening her laptop and projecting the evidence onto the screen behind her. "Here are the discrepancies we found. Monthly withdrawals that don't match any reported expenditures. They lead directly to a board member's personal account." Gasps filled the room, and the board members exchanged glances. "This is preposterous," one of them said, his face flushing with indignation. "You're accusing us without any substantial proof." "We have the proof," Jake interjected, his voice rising slightly. "The integrity of this foundation is at stake. You all knew my father. He would never have wanted his legacy to be marred by greed." Mr. Whitaker's expression hardened. "You should be careful with your words, young man. Harold Prescott was a pillar of this community." "And that's why we're here," Emily exclaimed, her passion igniting, "to ensure that his vision, his legacy of giving, isn't squandered by someone's selfishness. We owe it to him and to everyone who benefited from this foundation." The board member in question, a wiry man with thinning hair named Mr. Grant, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "This is a misunderstanding. I have always acted in the best interest of the foundation." "Then why are there discrepancies?" Jake challenged, crossing his arms. "Why did you divert funds intended for scholarships and healthcare initiatives?" "Enough!" Mr. Whitaker shouted, silencing the room. "We will take this matter seriously. This is not something we can overlook." As the board members erupted into a heated discussion, Emily and Jake exchanged glances of triumph. They had planted the seed of doubt, and the truth was beginning to emerge from the shadows. After what felt like an eternity, Mr. Whitaker turned to them, his demeanor softened. We'll conduct a thorough investigation. If there's any truth to your claims, we will act swiftly. Harold would have wanted that. With those words, the siblings felt a weight lift from their shoulders. They had done what they set out to achieve. As they left the boardroom, a sense of relief washed over them. "We did it," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper, still in disbelief. "Yeah, we did. And it feels good," Jake replied, a smile breaking across his face. "Maybe we really can make a difference." Days turned into weeks as the investigation unfolded, and the Foundation's reputation began to mend. The board member was forced to resign, and the organization was committed to restoring its integrity. Emily and Jake found themselves increasingly involved, attending meetings and helping to shape the future of the Foundation. One evening, after a particularly productive meeting, they stood on the balcony of the mansion, watching the sunset paint the sky with hues of orange and pink. The air was cool, and the silence between them was comfortable. "Can you believe how far we've come?" Emily said, her voice soft. "From being estranged to working together for something that matters." "I know," Jake replied, leaning against the railing. "I never thought we'd find common ground like this. It feels right." Emily turned to him, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "Do you think Dad would be proud of us?" "Absolutely," he said, a genuine smile breaking across his face. "He wanted us to understand the value of giving back, of family. We're finally living up to that." As they stood together, the weight of their past began to dissipate, replaced by a shared purpose and a commitment to their father's legacy. They had turned a painful chapter into one of hope and renewal, not just for themselves, but for the entire community. In that moment, surrounded by the fading light of day, Emily and Jake realized that true wealth lay not in material possessions, but in love, family, and the impacts they could make together. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they felt a sense of peace settle over them, a promise of brighter days to come.